That's weird. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you.
So again, just appreciation to Cole and to Brian for coming and sharing with them. I know they're very busy folks. We'll hear about one of the events that they're doing later on in the program. I just want to give a short bio for each of them before we begin the discussion. Cole is the executive director of the Mass Peace Action. He's worked with the Massachusetts People's Budget Campaign, the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign, the Indigenous Legislative Agenda Coalition. As you know, they just had a big victory with that coalition had a big victory with the decision by the governor to create a committee to look at the flag and seal of Massachusetts. He's also in the early 2010s served as the planning committee for the United for Justice with Peace and the United for Peace with Justice, Afghanistan's working group, and he was a member of the coordinating committee of United for Peace and Justice. Prior to working in this field, he worked in some tenant organizing with the Symphony Tenants Organizing and Fenway News in the 1970s. And he did Central America work in Jamaica Plain. He is what I consider one of the most talented members of the peace movement right now, having served as 8 years as the executive director of Mass Peace Action, but also and being one of the sort of architects of strategy, one of the strategists that we so greatly need, as addition to being an excellent writer and speaker. He is also a very thoughtful strategist for the peace movement. So we're very lucky to have him with us tonight. Brian is the lead organizer for MAPA and is organizing MAPA's Next Gen, a group of millennials who are working to bring their generation's perspective into the peace movement. Next Gen is currently focusing on the war in Yemen and Raytheon's role in it. He was here speaking to us last year sometime ago at one of our monthly meetings about his work on Yemen and the role of Raytheon. You may have seen his letter to the Globe a couple of weeks ago when he wrote a letter regarding the appointments and was able to connect Raytheon. And as he said, we finally found a piece of information in the Globe that had Raytheon and Yemen in the same paragraph. Thanks to his letter, we did have that. He is again the full-time organizer since 2019, and he's working on Middle East and anti-intervention work for MAPA. So we're very fortunate to have him with us, but also very fortunate to have him as a Watertown resident. So we're lucky to have Brian in two different roles. As I just, I thought, as Cole said, we're going to let this open up into discussion, and people can, if they'd like to chime in at any point. We have some very thoughtful questions, which could take up hours to answer, but we really do want to talk about the peace movement and the Biden administration. I know we're all pretty excited about what happened today. I did happen to have a chance during work to overhear the presentation from President Biden. What I didn't hear was a lot about foreign policy. And I think that says a lot about this administration, and it says a lot about where we are as a peace movement. We haven't broken into the top level of discussion points. And I would hope this tonight we can explore some of what we need to do in order to break into that top tier of important issues. So without any other discussion from me, I'm turning it over to Cole and to Brian. And thank you again for participating.
Thanks. So maybe Brian, do you want to talk about the appointments first? One of the questions Tony read is who has been appointed to what positions, so we could do that. And then I have some material on, a bunch of foreign policy issues we can get into after that.
Sure, sure. And the appointments that have been made do signal some of the intentions of the Biden administration. Tony is right that in his inaugural address today, President Biden didn't talk much, if at all, about foreign policy. Certainly, there were not a lot of specifics. And that disappointed me a little bit, especially considering that Joe Biden, when he was in the Senate, was for a time the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. He was also focused on foreign policy as one of his roles as vice president during the Obama administration. He also has many personal connections with world leaders, including the president of China, the president of Turkey. He, on the campaign trail, talked about his personal relations with foreign leaders and how he would be immediately able to step into the role of president of the United States for that reason. And I think that one thing that presidents often learn when they ascend to the office, to the highest office in the United States, is that they can be quite constrained when it comes to domestic policy. Without the full support of the Congress, their domestic agenda can be very difficult to get through. And the one area where they do have broad and extreme levels of power is on foreign policy. I think that Joe Biden knows this going in, right? He's been in Washington for almost 50 years, has great experience, as I said, being the chairman of Senate Foreign Relations, and was vice president for 8 years. So he doesn't need to learn those lessons. He knows those going in. But let's get down to the appointments, what Cole said. The Secretary of Defense is former General Lloyd Austin. He, if confirmed by the Senate, will be the first African American to lead the Pentagon. He is also only 4 years removed from being an active duty general and former commander of all forces in Iraq. And this will require the passage of a special waiver. Normally there is, to maintain civilian control over the military, there is a rule that requires 7 years of separation between active service in the military and taking that job as head of the Pentagon. This has only been, that waiver has only been passed twice in our history. The first time was George Marshall, who was Harry Truman's Secretary of Defense. And the second time was when General Jim Mattis was appointed by President Trump. So it's important to note that this is an aberration from the norm, to have a military man in power, or someone who was so recently in the military. And this has been remarked on by our Senator Warren, who was very vocal in her opposition to President Trump's nomination of General Mattis. She is also opposing this nomination on principle. And that was actually the subject of my letter to the Globe. The editorial board of the Globe publicly came out endorsing General Austin, and they talked at length about this issue of civilian control of the military. But the thing that actually concerns me more is what General Austin did when he left the military. In 2016, when he retired from the U.S. Army, he joined the board of United Technologies, which would then later be merged with Massachusetts-based Raytheon. And as a result of that merger, Raytheon Technologies, which is its new name, is the second largest weapons producer in the country. So that conflict of interest does worry me quite a bit, especially on the subject that I talked to all of you about the last time at the Watertown Library, and that is the war in Yemen. President Biden, during the course of the campaign, did talk about ending the war in Yemen. He promised to do so. And General Austin, in the course of the nomination process, when he was being questioned, said that he would recuse himself from questions, at least for the first year as Secretary of Defense, if confirmed, that he would recuse himself from decisions related to Raytheon. But this actually gives me great pause, because one of the things that Raytheon claims, and they brag quite openly about this, is that they train every single member of the United States military in some way. So I find it difficult to believe that someone can hold that job and not make any decisions that would affect Raytheon's bottom line. So that's an issue of the revolving door that I think we're all familiar with, of the corporate control over our government and the decisions that are made by our government. Because in his role as sitting on the board of directors for Raytheon, General Austin was paid some $300,000 a year to do so. And it has just come out that he may make up to $1.7 million on his way out the door from Raytheon Technologies. And one of the things that we're demanding of the Biden administration, and one of the things he promised, is that he would end our role in the war in Yemen. And to us, that means cutting off the arms sales to Saudi Arabia and their coalition allies. And many of those arms, including the offensive bombs and missiles that are being used against the people of Yemen, are made by Raytheon. It's extremely profitable business for them. So it does worry me that General Austin has these ties. And that's one reason, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, why we're having an immediate pressure campaign on the Biden administration to fulfill those promises that he will end the war in Yemen. His other appointments, there's lots of folks from Obama world, as they say, lots of people who had roles in Obama's administration. His Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, also does have ties to the military-industrial complex. He set up after leaving the Obama administration, where he was a deputy Secretary of State, set up West Exec Consultancy, which consulted defense contractors like Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed on how to get contracts with the Pentagon. So, it's unfortunately not that unusual these days for officials who work in the White House and in the federal bureaucracy to leave office and get jobs for big corporations, making lots of money. It's that revolving door that we talked about. He also took questions yesterday. I wasn't able to catch it all, but I was concerned at his characterization of our relationship with China. I know we're going to get into issues of international cooperation, but Mr. Blinken did say that he saw China as being the number one adversary of the United States for the next century. And this is something that greatly concerns us as peace activists. I see you have that in print. as well. And this is something that really concerns us. It's, as our friend Joe Gerson always says, it's the Thucydides trap of a power that begins to decline and another power that's rising, and the chances that they could go to war. Of course, we know that a war with another great power like China would be absolutely disastrous for the United States. And that's why we are starting up, have started a new working group to oppose a new Cold War for that very reason. Donald Trump obviously characterized China as an adversary of the United States. Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, refers to them as a competitor. It's a little bit better, but we're still very concerned that the military sees an opportunity to explode the Pentagon budget to prepare for war with China. And as we said, we know that that war could never come to pass without it spelling disaster for human beings everywhere. So we're very concerned with that as well. His director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, has a lot of problems as well. She supported Gina Haspel when she rose to the head of the CIA. Obviously, she had many connections with the torture rendition programs that the Bush administration put into place. Samantha Powers has been nominated to be the head of doling out the foreign aid for the Biden administration. When she served as ambassador to the UN for President Obama, she supported liberal intervention in Libya, in Syria, and in Yemen. We're seeing a lot of the same characters that were around when President Obama was in power. And we are going to have to oppose these liberal interventions, humanitarian interventions. This is something that I'm very concerned with, that during the Bush administration, our interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq were framed as defensive or preemptively defensive. Whereas our interventions in Libya, Syria, and in Yemen are based on humanitarianism. The argument is not made that these countries are a threat to the United States, but that we are doing so to protect civilians in other countries. Unfortunately, we've seen the results in Libya, Yemen, and Syria is that our interventions have only worsened the situation and led to more deaths of civilians. So that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on when it comes to the Biden administration. It's this whole idea that America needs to retake its place as the global leader. That gives me a lot of pause because we don't exactly have the best record on the world stage. So we really need to define what American leadership on the world stage means and make sure that we don't get into that issue that Sue Ellen mentioned, and that is the United States as the world police, which is something that we simply can't afford and the people of the world can't afford. Cole, did you want to take it, or what question did you want to?
Well, let's pause for comments and questions. And actually, Avril Haines was confirmed by the Senate 15 minutes ago.
15 minutes ago. Okay, wow.
They wanted to confirm Austin today also, but they can't because of the waiver. The House votes on the waiver tomorrow, and then the Senate will vote on it later.
And that's an important point because he's only 4 years removed from active military service. This is an opportunity where the House, as well as the Senate, gets to vote.
Yeah, the waiver is the harder vote than the confirmation. Actually, Warren, by the way, said she opposes the waiver. She did not say she will oppose him. She will oppose confirming him.
That's right.
So, any comments or questions before we jump into more stuff?
So I have a question, Cole. Just I'm a little confused. So if Warren's saying she would oppose the waiver but not confirmation, how does that add up?
Well, it doesn't add up for us, but I guess in her mind, let's step back. Biden, in a lot of ways, Biden is going to be a continuation of the Obama administration on foreign and national security policy. He's a little better than he's a little better than Obama on things like climate and immigration, where he's actually promised to make some significant moves if he follows through, even on economic stuff, but not on foreign policy. And that in turn reflects, as Tony was saying at the outset, there just isn't a peace movement in this country at the level that there is a climate movement and a racial justice movement, let's face it. So that bipartisan foreign policy is very strong. And even though Trump was erratic on his foreign policy, he actually didn't change. Well, I don't want to get into an analysis of Trump. That's another story. But anyway, when it comes to Biden, it's suddenly a love fest again in Washington, and they all love Austin. They all love, they all love these nominees. So, I don't know what Warren's calculations are. I'd like to think she would have herself as president nominated a better candidate than Austin. Yeah. But Austin is really like a creature of the military. And, he's talking about building the next generation fighter jet, expanding the Space Force and the cyber, and, moving forces to confront China. And he's like a strategist of the empire. That's what he is. And looks like he's a pretty good strategist from the impression people have so far.
One thing that I do want to say to Joe Biden's credit is that during the Obama administration, he was actually a voice for greater caution than Obama showed in terms of these humanitarian interventions. Oddly enough, Joe Biden was a champion of the Iraq War in 2002. Obviously, the invasion took place in 2003, but the debate was he championed the pro side. But along with Bob Gates, who was actually George W. Bush's last Secretary of Defense, Joe Biden was a voice against things like the Libyan intervention. Because he thought we were overextended and didn't need another war. So there are some signs that Joe Biden may have taken some of the lessons from the disastrous global war on terror to heart. And we hope he'll make those considerations. He'll take those into consideration when he's confronted with decisions about whether to use the military during his own administration.
I wonder, this wasn't one of the questions, but I'm going to ask Cole or Brian if they would. Just when we talk about this we use the term sort of the bipartisan foreign policy group in Washington. The term that is often used is the blob. Right. Could you, just for all of our sake, if you could, mention 2 or 3 things that make up this, that are common amongst the bipartisan people who believe in our bipartisan foreign policy? What are some of the basic characteristics of it?
The first one that comes to,
Go ahead.
I was going to say the first one that comes to mind is an issue that we work on constantly, and that is our ever-growing military budget. And this is what does connect our work to every issue. As I'm sure most of you know, the military budget regularly makes up more than 50% of the federal discretionary budget. And this comes at the expense of things like healthcare and education and infrastructure and energy. And I would say that that is something that is normally supported by the vast majority of the Congress, of the Washington establishment. This last military budget, $740.5 billion to the Pentagon that passed in late December, was extremely bipartisan. Even the Progressive Caucus in the House, which has 100 members, 67 of 100 members voted for that budget. So that's the first area that sticks out for me.
I mean, both parties are generally committed to a military mission of controlling the world. There's just no other way to put it. There's several specifics they put under that. Outmatching any potential peer competitor is what they call. So the hostility to Russia has been unremitting. It was a brief period in the 90s, I guess, after the Cold War when it was relaxed, but then it becomes tense again. And now again, Trump is a little bit of an outlier with his strange relationship with Russia. And yet overall, his administration still made a lot of military moves against Russia. So, just making sure we can defeat Russia and force them to do what we want. And now China's joining the same boat. So as China grows in economic strength, the US has taken steps to make sure that it can't equal the United States in military strength. And China has been rearming more because it has to in defense. It's like from Taiwan, and now it's trade treaties. They won't let them export their high-tech products to the United States. So they are quite clear that they're preparing for a war with China. Not that they would say they don't want a war, we just want China to back down, but they're prepared for that. And then for the smaller countries, when it doesn't matter whether it's Iran or North Korea or Venezuela, any country that gets out of line, that doesn't do what the United States wants it to do, becomes a problem and has to be coerced. And there's this escalation ladder of coercion. First they try political means, then they vote in the UN, then they have sanctions, then they have coups, then they have wars. And that's what it's all about. At the pinnacle of the entire strategy is nuclear weapons. They call them strategic weapons for a reason. That's the bottom line of what they rely on. They're determined to maintain nuclear superiority, and this applies to both parties equally. And that is how that's what it's about. Their ideology is that only the United States can bring peace as they see it to the world, can bring order, can stop all these crazy movements and countries that are jostling and trying to assert themselves, that they have to be kept into line, kept into order. So I think that's the bipartisan consensus. The hostility to Iran is a very particular thing. It goes back to the embassy takeover in the 70s, the birth of the Islamic Republic, when they overthrew our puppet there, the Shah. And especially in the military, from what I understand, they've really been inculcated with this determination to clamp down on Iran and make sure Iran can't get too big for its britches. But Iran is not a major military power, right? It's just a medium-sized country. What is it, 80 million people? It's no match to the United States militarily, but suddenly, for how many years, decades, it's been this huge obsession. Anyway, I don't know if that was a good answer to your question, Tony. But
that's a good one. Thank you. I appreciate that. Washington establishment is really, to understand what it is important. Thank you.
In a sentence, to me, it's a bipartisan belief in American exceptionalism. And to me, that means more than just thinking that we're the best country in the world, but American exceptionalism in the sense that the rules don't apply to us. America is exempt from the rules that we demand that all other countries follow. And if not, Cole described what happens.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Cole, I thought this was a joke, but apparently not. Reuters was reporting that Biden is going to recognize Guaido as the real leader of Venezuela. Is that true?
It's true. He invited him to the inauguration, and that's been signaled all along. Yeah. Even many of the most liberal representatives like Jim McGovern thinks that Guaido is the legitimate representative, though he, regrets some of the things we've done to clamp down on Venezuela. Yeah, that's where it's at. You saw Nancy Pelosi at the State of the Union, sort of give the salute to Guaido, and she made made the entire Congress stand up and give him a standing ovation. When was that, Brian? Last spring, or I can't remember when that was, a year or two ago. It was last.
I think that's right.
To the Union in January. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about one of the questions was where do we think things are going to be in terms of the Biden administration around Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, not good. Iraq has voted several times that the US troops should leave, but the US just doesn't want to leave. And so Iraq is divided. I don't know, maybe Brian, you may have more on this than I do, but I don't see the US getting out of Iraq for the second time easily. Afghanistan, we signed a treaty under Trump, not a treaty, but an agreement that we would be out by this May. And things immediately broke down after that. So I don't suppose they have any intention of honoring that. In some sense, they'd like to get out of Afghanistan, but they don't want to let it become an adversarial country. It's back to that same old thing again. If they can't control a country one way, you've got to control it another way, and they just don't want to let go of that. There's geopolitical reasons. That Bagram Air Base is a big installation. It's very well situated if you're looking at the whole strategy of like Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. So a lot of the military don't really want to let it go. I don't know.
I will say
everyone's tired of it, but that doesn't mean it's going to end.
That's true. And I will say to Biden's credit, and this is something that you may have heard him say on the campaign trail, because this was seen as a weakness by his opponents, said that he did champion the war in Iraq and tried to whip Democratic votes for it back in 2002. And his answer to that was then that when it came time to pull the troops out of Iraq, President Obama made Vice President Biden the point man on the strategy for removing troops, and also to the credit of General Austin. He was in charge of the strategy to remove troops from Iraq. They took a lot of criticism for getting the troops out, and obviously soldiers were sent back in after ISIS formed and took over large parts of Iraq. As to Afghanistan, this is an area of difficulty, and we should be reminded that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the war in Iraq. It just represents a complete failure of Afghanistan. Sorry, I misspoke. It just represents a complete failure of our strategy. This strategy of the war on terror, our war in the greater Middle East. Obama said during his tenure, I remember a speech that he gave at West Point, where he said that we need to talk about how we end this war on terror. This era needs to stop. And with the rise of ISIS, that sort of went to the back burner. This is someone in President Obama who was elected largely because of his opposition to the war in Iraq. But I hope that we can get back, that that we can get back to that because there's a lot of support for ending these wars at home, and we need those resources to rebuild the American economy and to provide for our people. It's wildly popular, but he won't do it without pressure.
So I was going to bring up three issues. One of the questions was, which of the promises are they going to keep? So I was going to bring up three promises that he did make. One is he said he would end the Yemen war. Two is he said he would return to the nuclear deal with Iran. And three is he said, it wasn't quite a promise, but he says he supports no first use of nuclear weapons. So I think it's interesting to look at those three. Yemen should have been in today's executive orders, right? So he should have just, Congress has passed it multiple times, almost overrode Trump's veto to cut off arms sales to Saudi. Didn't quite have 2/3. It's close to a no-brainer in Washington, and yet he didn't do it. So he'll probably do something on Yemen, right? Because he really did promise to end that war. But there's lots of ways to interpret that. Does he mean he's going to put into place a more effective diplomatic team? Does he mean that he's going to tell the Saudis once again, don't use these bombs to bomb civilians and only use them if you're attacked first or what have you? So I'm suspicious as hell. But having said that, I think he'll do something on Yemen. On Iran, it's more complicated still. What he should do is join the JCPOA immediately, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is the fancy word for the Iran nuclear deal. Obama signed that deal. Congress let him do it back in 2015. Trump canceled it and imposed new sanctions on Iran. Biden can lift those with the stroke of his pen, but he doesn't want to. What I think a lot of the hawks around him want to do is, renegotiate the deal with Iran and get more concessions from Iran before returning to the deal. The big problem with that is Iran is in no mood to do that. Iran is really disgusted with the United States. They haven't received the economic benefits they signed up for under the deal, where they would be able to trade freely and sell their oil, for example. Iran is in a very difficult economic situation. They have a national election in June. The hardliners are expected to win at this point because the Iranian public has pretty much turned against the whole policy of negotiating with the United States. It's not hopeless, but that's what it's looking like. So he shouldn't do that. He should not run right up till June, because he should sign that deal today, because that's the best chance of moving forward in a positive direction with Iran. But unfortunately, the people that have surrounded him, it's not really clear, and he hasn't made a really clear commitment how he's going to handle it.
On that note, he has said that he views re-entering the JCPOA, which was an extremely successful agreement. They brought together Russia, China, Germany, the UK, France, the US, and Iran on a deal. And he has said that re-entering that deal, he sees that as the first step towards future negotiations. It's being pushed back against, for sure, but there are reasons to be hopeful. He has named Secretary of State John Kerry, our own John Kerry, as a member of his National Security Council. And obviously, the Iran nuclear deal was one of the greatest achievements of John Kerry's career. And we know that he would like to see that deal re-entered into. And he has a very close relationship with Joe Biden. He supported him early on in the Democratic primary. They were very close during the Obama administration. And Iran has made it clear that President Rouhani of Iran said openly that if President Biden says he'll re-enter the deal, that they will agree within the hour. So This is right there before them. This is like ending the war in Yemen. These are legacy items that are right before President Biden. A lot of them are the Iran nuclear deal is a legacy achievement of President Obama, and he should save it on behalf of his former boss and for the good of Iran and the United States.
Can I ask a related question? As we, the United States, begins to re-engage with other countries on the global scale, and particularly those who signed on to the JCPOA, to what extent do you think those countries will try to exert influence on the US to rejoin?
Well, yes, I think they would all say they're in favor of it. The Europeans have really played a double game. We were pretty disappointed with their behavior. We thought they would exert more pressure on Trump than they did. They really didn't do much of anything. It turns out that they're really enmeshed economically with the United States, and they just can't, they don't have that much freedom of action. But, you know, diplomatically, yes, they will say the US should return to the deal, but they will say, oh, there's all these other things we don't like that Iran is doing. China and Russia, on the other hand, have always, you know, supported the deal, and they will not change their opinion. They never have.
Just a couple of things to President Biden's credit. This is just today. The Muslim ban is going to be over.
Yeah,
that
matters
over
to Iranians, you know, a lot.
It absolutely does, and that just being able to travel back and forth, you know, Iranians have to be incredibly careful about, you know, do they want to come to the United States? Do they want to go and visit their families? Are they going to be allowed to come back? That is another thing that that we won't have to worry about. That's a benefit to not having Donald Trump as president of the United States. Another thing that Biden says is he's immediately rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. That's important. We know that it doesn't go far enough, but it was absolutely disastrous how Trump tore up that deal, and really, like tearing up the Iran nuclear deal, I see that as an act of spite more than anything else. So it's absolutely fantastic that those two things are being reversed. Another area where we think we could have a quick and important achievement is a renewal of another one of Obama's great achievements, which is New START, which is a strategic arms limitation treaty between the United States and Russia. It's really the last surviving one. It is set to expire just in a few weeks. And we are hoping that President Biden will accept the offer of Russia to renew and extend that treaty for another 5 years, because this is no time to be getting into an arms race with another great power.
Yeah, I think Biden will. And
I do too.
There's actually 3 nuclear treaties that Trump canceled. That was one of them, probably the most important of the 3. Second was called Open Skies, and the third was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. You know, that nuclear bureaucracy, you know, I'm afraid even rejoining the INF, Biden would have to make a push inside of the administration to do it. So I wouldn't be too confident.
To Abby's point, though, that treaty is incredibly important to our European allies, because that is the short-range missiles, and that has a greater effect on countries that are closer to Russia, our European allies.
But no first use is one of the things that the nuclear disarmament movement has reasonable cause to expect Biden to do. Of course, we expected the same thing of Obama, and he didn't do it. He went to Cairo in his first, year of his presidency, and he said, "We need universal nuclear disarmament in this world. I'm not sure we'll get there in my lifetime, but we need to get there." Is what he said in that speech. But by his 8th year in office, he still hadn't even enacted no first use. He actually you know, a lot of the advocates thought he was going to. They were studying it, but in the end, they got pressured or talked out of it by the military strategists. So hopefully Biden will follow through. It's going to, from the peace movement's point of view, it's going to be a dual strategy. One is through Congress. Markey again will introduce the bill to set it as a law, as he did last cycle, and also the nuclear posture review is something that each president usually causes to be written within the first 1 or 2 years of the presidency. And there's been some speculation they're going to try to get Biden's one done by August because the non-proliferation treaty is coming. Non-proliferation treaty meeting is coming up. The NPT is really the core nuclear treaty in the in the entire arms control regime. It usually meets every 5 years. It didn't meet last year because of COVID, so the meeting's going to happen in August if it doesn't get postponed again. And so that would be a great time for Biden to declare a no first use policy. No first use is just a policy. China is a no first use country. India is a no first use country. So some of the Soviet Union was a no first use country, although Russia has changed that since. Some of the nuclear powers have declared they will never use nuclear weapons first unless attacked with a nuclear weapon. But the United States has never made that commitment. In other words, a commitment that their nuclear weapons are only for defense, for deterrence against nuclear attack, and not for other purposes. You could say your nuclear weapons are for deterrence against a conventional attack, or you could, or on sub rosa, you can use them as a threat. And of course, Dan Ellsberg and Joseph Gerson has made the point that it often has been used as a threat. So taking that threat off the table with the no first use policy would be significant.
Let's stick on nuclear weapons just for one quick question about it. And I think my figure may be wrong, but where does Biden, or do you think he's going to stand on the $1.9 trillion over 10 years to refit and a new generation of nuclear weapons, both land, sea, and air, the triad of nuclear weapons? Do you think he will do anything to halt that?
Nope.
I wish I could disagree, but it's this is another. It relates to the issue of no first use as well, because these nuclear modernizations that they're talking about increase the danger. Russia has already come out and said that they would view any missile coming at them as a nuclear threat and respond in kind. They're talking about modernizations that put nuclear warheads on cruise missiles, this issue of hypersonic missiles. This shortens the time frame of reaction. We all know that in this situation that we've been in for so long, or were in so long, during the Cold War of brinksmanship, it was already an incredibly short amount of time that presidents or rulers of any of these nuclear powers had to react. And there's always a danger that you could be making a horrible mistake. There have been documented dozens of cases of nuclear near misses when people were acting from inaccurate information and almost launched nuclear wars by mistake. And this modernization, which is being sold as a way to make nuclear weapons safer, actually, it makes them more dangerous because it shortens the reaction time. And it also prolongs the overall problem. If we create a new generation of nuclear weapons, then this danger will last for another generation. And We're walking a tightrope, as someone once said. I think it was Bertrand Russell said, we're walking a tightrope. And how long can we expect it to do so without falling into disaster? I don't think we can invest in a new generation of nuclear weapons and hope we can make it through.
It's 70 billion a year we spend on nuclear weapons. Let me just read a quote from Joe Cirincione, because to answer Tony, if we want to stop these nuclear weapons, we've got to build a stronger peace movement. So how are we going to do that? Here's what Joe Cirincione says. The independent non-government groups that represent the last truly independent organizations promoting a sane nuclear policy, those groups like Watertown Citizens and Mass Peace Action, those groups must recognize the simple fact of life. No alternative nuclear posture or clever op-ed will impact policy, no matter how brilliant. The only strategy that can succeed is to focus on the money. That means teaming up with those fighting to redefine what makes and keeps us safe, who advocate for increased funding to combat climate change, to battle the pandemic, to improve healthcare, and to address social inequities. They need the funds that are currently locked up in obsolete and dangerous weapons programs.
Yes, 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 yes.
Well,
so it really is Raytheon and his colleagues that we're talking about. Nuclear weapons are incredibly profitable. They don't account for the money they receive. It's all classified. Nobody can audit and see if they're, if they need all that money. Could you build the same nuclear weapons for 35 billion? Nobody knows. So that's the last contract they're going to give up.
They called them gold-plated weapons systems for that reason. And this is exactly why the military-industrial complex, these companies like Raytheon, love the idea of a Cold War, a new Cold War with China, because it means billions of dollars in weapons contracts. And this is something that the peace movement needs to be concerned with, incredibly concerned with going forward, because in that military budget, in the policy side of it, the National Defense Authorization Act, what the Congress passed was a strategy of full spectrum dominance in the Indo-Pacific. And that means being ready to combat and defeat China across the entire Pacific and Indian Oceans. And that means billions and billions, trillions of dollars, as Tony said. The estimate I heard was $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years for nuclear modernization. It doesn't benefit the people of the world, but it benefits a few people very greatly.
Tony?
Abby, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm finding myself getting extremely restless, and I'm realizing that my ability to take in more of these details, I'm challenged. And what I'm realizing is I'm still reeling from the insurrection of 2 weeks ago. I'm reeling from the fact that we almost lost our democratic institutions. I'm devastated. And so it's so hard for me. I know that these questions were framed around foreign policy. I can't put my mind there. And the things that are in our face around this pandemic, climate change, racism, the economy, those are like staring us in our face. It's hard for me to make space in my brain for this piece. I don't know if that resonates, if anyone else is feeling it, but it's really difficult to focus on these details.
Yeah, and we should probably let up on the details and open up into a more general discussion. I think everybody's feeling the way you are, Abby. The political struggle is intense. Right?
I'm sorry, I'm not where Abby is. I do think, and this is, I think, the issue here for us. We're talking about U.S. hegemony around the world, once again, supported by your tax dollars, a bloated military budget, the risk of nuclear war, the two twin risks or major things that Chomsky talks about are nuclear war and climate change and climate catastrophes. So I'm real concerned that we have a president now who has not taken a different view than the Washington establishment about our US foreign policy. And I'm afraid that if we don't start focusing on it a little bit more, we're going to find ourselves right back where we were with the earlier administrations. We're going to continue to be in Afghanistan. We're going to continue to be in Syria and Yemen. We're going to continue to spend billions and billions of dollars on weapon systems. So I would like actually just to stick to this for a little bit longer and then maybe go where Abby would like us to go. But just asking Cole and Brian 2 quick questions, and then we can go which way the rest of the group wants to go. And the 2 questions for me is, where do you think we should be putting our energy as a peace movement? And where do you think our allies are in Congress? If you can answer those 2 questions, and then we can sort of let people take it wherever they want.
Well, I'll answer the first part really quick, and then Cole, I would like you to address that second part. There's also a great question in the chat from Arun asking us to comment on Catherine Clark, and I know Cole has a fantastic framing of different categories of progressives and allies within the Democratic Party that I think is very useful. But I think it's very important for us to focus on trying to get some short-term achievements. So 3 areas where I would put short-term effort and try and achieve some victories that hopefully we can then gain some momentum from are things that we already talked about. So ending the war in Yemen and stopping our arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. That's a chance for us to end the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world today and do so quickly. I think we can do that with pressure. The second is rejoining the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. I do think that there are forces within Biden's administration that really want that. I think President Obama really wants that legacy item restored. We saw the Trump administration bring us to the brink of another disastrous generational war with Iran on 3 occasions during his administration. I think if we want to avoid that war, we need to re-enter that deal and do so quickly. There's a time limit. And the third is rejoining New START and restoring those nuclear treaties with Russia. I think those are 3 things that we can do in the short term, and those would be meaningful victories for the peace community. And I think that, like any other movement, you need to get some wins to keep you going, and just to realize that these peace priorities are attainable and achievable. Do you want to address our allies in Congress, Cole?
Yeah, well, the progressives do cover a broad spectrum, but the group called the Squad is the most reliable force right now in Congress. And so our own Ayanna Pressley is a member of that, and she's, I think, maybe the most seasoned politician among them, perhaps. So she's,
for sure,
very savvy on policy and connecting different issues together. But also AOC and Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush has been stepping right out there, and Mondaire Jones and so on. So we now have a squad of 8, I think they're counting it. Then we have your, there's a second group of progressives that will vote against military spending, that will vote against interventions pretty reliably. So we're looking at your Jim McGovern, Ed Markey, Ro Khanna,
Mark Pocan.
Right. And then let's call them your moderate progressives that are more progressive on domestic policy, but really not so much on foreign policy. And I would, put Catherine Clark in that category. We actually did have a lobby meeting with Catherine Clark a few weeks ago. Brian organized it. And she was talking about cutting the military budget, but it was clear that she was talking about trimming a few, things around the edges rather than making deep cuts. I guess just to give you a sense of the scale, last summer, Congress voted on cutting 10% out. And that was supported by Warren, Markey, Bernie, even Chuck Schumer supported that, and McGovern and Presley. Well, actually, our whole delegation supported except for Seth Moulton. But then when they got the full bill with all the amendments, a lot of them backed off. So it's mixed. So whereas there's another faction in Congress that will cut the military budget 50%, not 10%. And then now we're talking Barbara Lee, Ro Khanna, and again, Presley and McGovern are there. So it's quite a range. The progressives in Congress are talking about getting more organized. They have made some changes to the rules of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They now have a single chair instead of co-chairs, and I think that will help them be more cohesive. They've also got a rule that you've got to vote you've got to support the vote, the progressive agenda with your votes a certain percentage of the time or you'll be kicked out. So there's going to be a little bit of discipline, supposedly. We'll see how it works out, but at least they're setting down off on that road.
Thank you. Please, let's go back to what Abby's.
I do think it's very important to get to what Abby was saying. And it's Cole raised it in that great quote by Joe Cirincione. We need to relate these issues that can be complicated and can seem like they're very far away. We need to relate these to people's daily lives so we can build up the peace movement, so we can be effective. To Abby's point about the insurrection that we saw on January the 6th, I think it's incredibly important to address that because you fear for our democracy, and you're right to do so. Right? We have a republic here in the United States only if we can keep it, right? As Ben Franklin may have said. But one statement, and I forget who made it, but it really hit home to me. It may have been Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, was to think about how you felt during that violent scene on January the 6th, and then consider a citizen of the Middle East or a citizen of Latin America, South America or Central America, and the fear that they have to live in for democracy in their own country. When you think about the repeated interventions, covert and overt, around the world that have been sponsored and carried out by our government. It's Stephen Kinzer wrote, one of our favorites, Stephen Kinzer wrote a great argument about this, that the chickens are coming home to roost, that, violence and interference abroad follows us home. And that's another way to relate. But I really do think that we need to redefine what national security means. Almost $750 billion a year on bombs and missiles and planes and aircraft carriers did not prevent now 400,000 people dying from a pandemic. It's some 40 to 60,000 people die a year from lack of health insurance. That's more by some estimates in 1 year than we lost in our entire involvement in Vietnam. Overinvestment in the military. It doesn't make us strong. In fact, it weakens us. And we really need to redefine what national security means and relate to these domestic issues, I think.
Please, people should just chime in on anything at this point, please.
Yeah, I see a good one in the chat. Ben, do you want to ask your question out loud?
Oh, I was on mute. Yeah, sure. I just joined this group, to be honest. I was listening to it and I really enjoyed this.
You're fading out a little bit, Ben.
Oh, I was.
You were strong at the beginning, but you went weak.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, awesome. I was hearing what you said about, you know, convincing people to like understand the issues. And I think that if we got someone, you know, if we even got someone who was even in the situation or who experienced it to come speak to people, I was thinking that that would be a great way of like making it more personal. If you could get someone to like, you know, humanize the situation more than just a political conflict happening somewhere, but like, you know, someone to just sort of tell a story about how it happened to them.
Yeah.
Or how
I'll just put in the chat we actually held a program on Syria last week with a speaker. She's Lebanese American. She's a journalist. She wasn't really speaking about her personal situation primarily, but you know, she did bring a sense of immediacy to it.
She's half Syrian as well.
Is she? Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I think this is a very important point in how we can relate our foreign policy to something that's often treated as a domestic issue, and that is our immigration policy.
Yeah.
It's treated as a domestic issue. It's a foreign policy and international issue. By definition, it's about people emigrating and immigrating from other countries. And I think it's important to note that we are living in the greatest refugee and migration crisis currently since World War II.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, right? Because immigration is directly connected to war, militarism, foreign policy. We saw, you know, people fleeing their homes in the Middle East and in Latin America as a direct result of U.S. policy of intervention. You know, when you overthrow governments, when you create chaos, when you export weapons, millions of weapons, it creates a horrible situation for people to live in. And I think we have this idea left over, this idea of the myth of America that people are seeking a life in the United States for a better situation, to participate in the American dream. And I think we need to admit that a lot of people that are coming to this country are doing so because they're running for their lives.
Yeah.
And what they're running from is a policy that has been decided upon in Washington, D.C. and imposed on the people of these countries, right? It's because of our drug war, because of our sanctions policies, because of the weapons that we export. They're creating a nightmare for people to live in. And I think that Ben is right. I think that hearing from people directly who are experiencing that is a way to get through to people.
I want to mention that hearing from people directly, we have people in Watertown among us and nearby towns who in fact have fled, you know, from these places and crossed the border and ended up in detention centers or fled the wars in Syria. So, and it's a trade-off kind of finding people's comfort level, because a lot of those folks that our refugee support group works with, they are very much not wanting to be public about the trauma that they have suffered. Very, very tricky and difficult.
Yep.
So I did mention that it turns out for our next monthly meeting in February, on the 17th, that our refugee support group is going to give a presentation and kind of give people updates on DACA, on immigration stuff, on just all the things that we do and the kinds of things we're thinking about and talking about.
And so here's another angle, you know, just on the, we have a Fund Healthcare Not Warfare campaign, and I was just going to put the open letter in the chat. Actually, if whoever's hosting wants to let me share, I could show you the picture, but we're trying to connect all the issues connected with responding to the COVID epidemic with the fact that we're wasting all the money on militarism, and trying to make a political cause out of that, both at the state and federal levels. So we actually have a group of doctors and other healthcare advocates that have joined with Mass Peace Action to work on this.
No, I didn't do it either.
It is now 8:20, and we have left some time for announcements if there are critical announcements people want to make, and also just to talk a little bit about evaluating this particular meeting, and people can certainly do it in the chat, but can also do it you know, verbally and orally and speaking. So I would just ask quickly any announcements people are wanting to make sure that we make.
Well, I want to definitely announce that this coming Saturday, and I know maybe Cole will do a better job of it than I, but there's been an ongoing effort for conferences on nuclear weapons. And on Saturday, on the 23rd, there's a conference being held at, well, Zoom, but it would have been held at MIT. It's called Reducing the Threat of Nuclear War, Investing in Mines, Not Missiles, just what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Reducing the Threat of Nuclear War, Investing in Mines and Missiles. It's got an amazing array of people. It starts at 9:30 and it ends at 5. And there you go. Cole put up just taking a look at some of the people who are going to be at this conference it's quite an amazing feat. From folks from the Poor People's Campaign and people from from Code Pink, and again, Ed Markey will be there. It's just a great conference, and so I would consider it's a free one, and you can just go on to MAPPA's website and register. That's all you need to do, though, is you need to register, though it doesn't cost anything. So I hope you can attend. This other announcement that I'd like to make is we talked a little bit about weapons treaties, nuclear weapons treaties. There's a new one that finally has gone into force. It's called a Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Yeah.
And that has gone into effect. Well, I'm sorry, it's gone into force because 50 countries have signed on to it. We need to have more countries ratify it, but it has now gone into force. And there's a number of programs that are going to be happening this weekend. And you can go to, again, their website to see the programs. There's a, Cole, you want to mention the march
I think there's 5 or 6 local events in Massachusetts. They're all mostly on Friday, which is the day the treaty officially goes into effect. There's one in Fresh Pond in Cambridge. There's one at the State House, which is a short march from Park Street to the State House with speakers. There's there's 2 in Western Mass. I think Arlington is going to do its one on Saturday and Newton on Monday. So those
yeah, if I push the one in Newton, we've been asked by our friends up there in Newton Dialogue to make sure I announce this, that it'll be on Monday from 4 to 5 at Newton Center at the corners of Center Street and Beacon Street. Stand out, stand up to push the US to join the Treaty for Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So maybe you can get over to Newton across the water, across the bridge to Newton. So
There's that. But, yeah.
There you go. That's the Newton one. So again, if you can make the conference on nuclear weapons, mines, support mines, not missiles, this coming Saturday, and then if you can do any of the events around the putting the treaty into force of the prohibition of nuclear weapons over the next three days, that would be wonderful. That's all I have.
I think there's something Monday, international. Brian, you want to talk about it? Because
I was just about to.
Okay.
Thank you, Jean. That's another thing that's going on Monday, and one of our short-term priorities. This is the International Day of Action to end the war in Yemen, which we think is a real possibility to end U.S. participation. And this really is an international event. I believe it's 266 organizations across the world from 17 different countries. So lots of organizations in the UK, in the US, in Africa, Bangladesh, India. It's all over the world. People are calling for an end to this catastrophe in Yemen. And, you know, we have reason to believe that this is something that we can achieve if we put enough pressure here in the US on Joe Biden. So there's going to be an in-person rally and march starting at the State House at 12 noon on the 25th. There's also going to be an international webinar featuring former labor leader Jeremy Corbyn, and actor Danny Glover is going to be there, and experts on Yemen as well. And that's at 2 p.m. But what we're really trying to do is put pressure on the Biden administration. So we're going to be calling for people to pick up the phone and call the White House, and to send messages, and to participate in a social media campaign. And we will give you alerts on exactly how you can get involved. But we think that with pressure, this is something that can be achieved in the short term. As Cole said, it should have been a day one achievement, but this is something that that Joe Biden has promised he would do. And it's up to us to make sure he keeps that promise.
Thank you, Brian. Any other announcements anyone needs to make? So we have just a few minutes left, and besides just wanting to thank Brian and Cole for their incredible expertise and ability to address so many of these issues. And Brian, you've been talking to us and presenting about Yemen so passionately for so long. And it's encouraging to think that maybe something can actually be done. And the work that Mass Peace Action is doing is just so crucial and fantastic for all of us. So thank you all. Thank you very, very much to both of you.
Oh, thank you, Sue Ellen, and all of you for having us and for participating in the dialogue. It's great to be with you.
I think you just did an excellent job of covering the territory to someone who hasn't been following it. Just the content, you just presented it in a way that just seems very clear to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to add my amen to that. Just an extraordinary presentation, and I just, it was so clear and so compelling. I just feel I'm leaving with an updated map of what we need to do short term, and what we can try to do longer term, and I think also linking the military budget to the pandemic, to climate change is our best hope. Yes. I raised my hand when Abby was speaking, and it wasn't that I didn't have the bandwidth. I'm deeply appreciating in this short amount of time you're equipping us. It was that it just makes me so sad not to be able to give one full day to celebrating our victories. It's just the unfortunate timing of the meeting. It's like, wow, just, you know, Ossoff and Warnock were just sworn in. It's like, could we just have a little while to celebrate without having to take on the burdens again? But it didn't stop me from taking in what you were saying, and I thank you.
Yeah, we have a real opportunity, and I'm glad you mentioned the two new senators, Reverend Warnock especially. You know, this is an activist. This is he is the Peace Action endorsed him. He's been a peace advocate for a long time.
Good.
So it's absolutely fantastic that he's in the Senate now. I'm glad you raised that. There's reason for hope. There's reason for hope. It's always important to remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. If there's too much despair, we'll lose our energy to act. So.
It's so interesting that, you know, on the 6th, I was crying off and on all night and into the wee hours as I was listening to the House and the arguments, the debates and all that, and just what had happened. It was just so upsetting and so disturbing. And today I was crying, you know, tears of joy and relief just watching the inauguration today. And I realized a lot of it is really a sense of relief, even though we know we have amazing amounts of work that have to be done. But as Sharon's saying, you know, we can still celebrate and just really appreciate the fact that things are going to be better in a lot of ways, and already starting this afternoon. You know, and making sure we do celebrate. You know, I was sitting there having an inauguration lunch, you know, with friends while watching it together with my best friend. We've been a pod, and being able to have that opportunity of creating this inauguration lunch and, you know, sparkling stuff to sip as soon as the oaths were taken, and it was just incredible. And watching, you know, the singing, the Amanda, you know, Gorman was so unbelievably inspiring, and realizing that, you know, we do need to really appreciate and experience that kind of joy and progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the progressives won this election for Biden, but we still have a lot of work to do and make sure that we retain this victory. Biden has to deliver for the progressive base, or else they're not going to stick with him forever. So, you know.
We only got the next 4 years to, who knows what will be plotted.
He put $15 an hour in his COVID recovery package, and of course the Republicans are jumping all over that. You know, it's the one thing they won't tolerate, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brian and Cole, again. I'm going to stop recording at this point. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a wonderful night, everyone, and to bask in